My wife cheated, I served divorce papers, and now she wants to reconcile. Should I take her back? Hey Reddit. I met my wife 6 years ago, and from the very start, I knew she was someone special. We quickly built a life together and got married 2 years after we met. I thought we had everything: trust, love, and a future full of promise. But then, out of nowhere, everything came crashing down. I found out about her affair, and the moment I did, my entire world turned upside down. The woman I trusted more than anyone had betrayed me in the worst possible way. The discovery was a gut-wrenching moment. I couldn't believe it. My mind raced as I processed the evidence I had found, each second feeling like a lifetime of shock, anger, and disbelief. I felt completely betrayed, heartbroken and lost, like everything I thought I knew about her and our relationship had been a lie. The overwhelming pain made it impossible to think clearly, and I was consumed by the raw emotions of confusion and despair. How could she do this to me? To us? After the shock wore off, the breakdown hit. The urge to lash out at her was overwhelming, but I knew that would only make things worse. I needed to process everything first, to work through the anger, sadness, and the confusion that was tearing me apart. I found myself questioning everything: our marriage, my choices, and even myself. Was I not enough? Did I miss the signs? My emotions were all over the place, and I was struggling to understand how I could have been so blind to the betrayal. Eventually, I made the difficult decision to serve her divorce papers. At the time, it felt like the only way to take control of my life again. I thought it was the end of everything, the only way to escape the pain she had caused. But then, she begged me for another chance. She claimed that she had changed, that she was willing to do whatever it took to rebuild our relationship. She promised to go to therapy and fix what she had broken. Despite the pain, part of me was still clinging to hope, unsure whether to believe her or not. As we began to navigate the early stages of reconciliation, the emotional pain was always there. Trust, once broken, doesn't come back easily. Each day was a reminder of the betrayal, and it was hard to imagine a future together without constantly questioning her commitment. I knew I had to face the hurt, but it wasn't easy. I had to be honest about my feelings, even when it felt like I was walking on eggshells. Every moment of progress seemed to come with its own set of challenges. Open communication became key. We knew that we couldn't rebuild our relationship without it. We both had to be brutally honest about what had happened, what we were feeling, and where we wanted to go from here. Therapy helped, but it also forced us to confront uncomfortable truths. There were moments of anger and moments of vulnerability, but we learned to communicate again, to express our emotions without fear of judgment or resentment. It wasn't perfect, but it was progress. Trust building was slow and painful. It wasn't something that could be fixed overnight, and there were many setbacks. At times, I doubted whether it was even possible to trust her again. But we took small steps. I let her prove her commitment with actions, not just words. I had to remind myself that rebuilding trust takes time, patience, and consistent effort. It was a long road, but we took it one step at a time. Rebuilding intimacy was one of the hardest aspects. Physical intimacy felt awkward and uncertain. I was afraid to reconnect on that level, unsure if I could trust her with my heart again. But gradually, we worked through it. We started small, taking things slow, and rebuilding the connection we once had. The fear and hesitation slowly gave way to tenderness and care as we rediscovered each other. Emotional intimacy was just as important. We needed to reconnect emotionally, to be vulnerable with each other again. We shared our fears, our pain, and our hopes for the future. It was painful at times, but it also allowed us to rebuild empathy for one another. We learned to understand each other's needs, to listen deeply without judgment. It wasn't easy, but it was necessary if we wanted to heal. Forgiveness was a difficult part of the journey. I had to forgive myself for letting it happen and for the pain I caused in the process. But I also had to find a way to forgive her. Forgiveness didn't mean forgetting or excusing the betrayal, it meant letting go of the anger and resentment that would only keep us stuck. It was a process, one that took time and effort from both of us. But I knew that forgiveness was essential for our healing, both as individuals and as a couple. Despite our progress, there were many challenges and setbacks. There were triggers, moments when the pain resurfaced, reminding me of what had happened. I had to learn to manage these triggers, to cope with the emotional weight they brought. Support from friends, family, and a therapist helped me navigate these tough moments, but I also had to lean on my own resilience. Doubts and insecurities often crept in. The constant questioning: was I making the right choice? Was I setting myself up for more heartbreak? The vulnerability that came with reconciling was overwhelming at times. But I had to address these doubts head on, talking through them with my wife and making sure we were both on the same page. Patience became the cornerstone of our reconciliation. I had to remind myself that healing doesn't happen quickly. Reconciliation requires time, effort, and commitment. It's a journey, not a destination. I had to set realistic expectations, celebrate small victories, and understand that setbacks are part of the process. It wasn't easy, but every small step forward gave me hope for the future. Through it all, I've learned that reconciliation is a complicated, emotional journey. It's not a straight path, and there will always be challenges. But with patience, open communication, and a commitment to healing, it's possible to rebuild, even after the deepest betrayal. However, there's still so much more to this story, more struggles, breakthroughs, and hard choices that we're still facing. This isn't the end. Stay tuned for the next update as we continue this journey of healing and rebuilding, one step at a time. Update. After serving my wife divorce papers, I was met with more pleas for reconciliation than I ever anticipated. The emotional roller coaster of shock, betrayal, and anger gradually gave way to conversations. Therapy was the first step we took, and it wasn't as easy as I hoped. The truth was, I didn't know if I was ready to forgive her or if reconciliation was even possible. I found myself torn between wanting to believe her promises and the overwhelming pain of what she had done. Every time she said she was sorry, I had this deep ache in my chest. Was she truly remorseful, or was this just her attempt to save herself from the consequences of her actions? The hardest part of this first phase was living with the constant reminder of the affair. There were moments of raw honesty when she admitted that she had felt emotionally neglected in the marriage, but this did not justify what had happened. Slowly, however, I began to realize that healing would require both of us to confront the truth. It wasn't just about me healing from the betrayal, but her taking responsibility for her actions. I had doubts, a lot of them, but I began to feel like perhaps we could rebuild. Not immediately, and certainly not without more struggles. But, with therapy, open conversations, and small gestures of sincerity, I started to cautiously let my guard down. We weren't where we needed to be yet, but it felt like we might be taking the first steps toward a new beginning. As I thought about our past, I realized there were so many good memories that I didn't want to just throw away. Despite the betrayal, there were times when we had been genuinely happy together, and I wondered if that could be recaptured. Could we return to that place, or had too much been broken? I started questioning whether love could survive such deep hurt, or if I was just clinging to hope because it was easier than facing the cold reality of a broken marriage. We also had to face the realities of our marriage, the emotional distance that had developed over time, the things we had neglected, and the reasons that led to the affair in the first place. It wasn't just about her mistake, it was about us, both of us, and the part we each played in the distance that grew between us. Therapy helped in making us realize that this wasn't a one-sided issue. I wasn't perfect either, and that acknowledgement, however painful, was crucial. The biggest step forward was when I realized that reconciliation wasn't just about forgiving her, it was about allowing myself to heal. I needed to find a way to move forward with or without her, and that was the hardest realization of all. There was a part of me that still wasn't sure if I could trust her again, but I had to give myself permission to heal, whether or not reconciliation happened. Another update. Weeks into our reconciliation journey, things started to feel like a true back-and-forth struggle. My wife was doing everything right, saying the right things, attending therapy without fail, and being transparent about her feelings. But my doubts didn't go away. Every so often, something, a moment, a look, a small action, would remind me of the betrayal, and I'd feel my heart sink all over again. I questioned whether I was just fooling myself into thinking that reconciliation was truly possible. During this phase, there were setbacks, many of them. Sometimes we'd have arguments that felt like we were right back at square one, but at other times, we would sit down and talk through our issues, listening with an empathy I hadn't seen from her before. I was starting to realize that we were facing this challenge together. It wasn't just me suffering alone in silence anymore. She was putting in the effort, showing vulnerability, and doing her part to help rebuild the trust that had been shattered. The process was painful and slow, but at times, we shared moments of real connection. There were nights where we spoke for hours, and I began to remember why I had fallen in love with her in the first place. Still, doubts crept in. Could I ever really trust her again? Was I just waiting for the next shoe to drop? But through it all, there was one undeniable truth: we were both trying. And despite the constant setbacks, I began to believe that maybe it wasn't about reaching perfection. Maybe it was about seeing the effort and knowing that we were both committed to this, even if it meant taking it one day at a time. I also started focusing on my own personal healing. I realized I couldn't just fix the relationship, I had to fix myself too. Therapy helped me understand that some of my own unresolved issues were contributing to my fears and doubts about trusting her again. If I didn't deal with my own emotional baggage, I would never be able to rebuild the trust that had been shattered. Still, the road was far from easy. There were days when I felt like everything was fine, and then, just as quickly, I'd be hit with a wave of doubt or insecurity. Trust didn't come back overnight. It was a slow process, filled with setbacks and progress in equal measure. But in the midst of that struggle, there was one thing I clung to: the fact that we were both still showing up. And that was something worth fighting for. There were also moments when I thought about the future. What would our relationship look like months, or even years, from now? Could we really rebuild from something so deep? The truth was, I didn't know. I could only take it one day at a time. Some days felt like huge progress, while others felt like we were sliding backward. But I had to trust the process, even if the end result was still uncertain. Final update. As weeks turned into months, I started to see subtle, but important, changes in our relationship. The healing was happening, albeit at a much slower pace than I had hoped. We were no longer consumed by the pain of the affair every minute of every day, but it still reared its ugly head during certain moments. Trust, while still fragile, was slowly rebuilding. It was like walking on a tightrope. One misstep could cause everything to crumble again. One of the biggest challenges we faced was redefining what intimacy meant in our marriage. Physical intimacy felt awkward and distant at first. The emotional scars from the affair lingered, making me hesitant to reconnect in that way. But over time, we began to rebuild that aspect of our relationship too. It wasn't just about physical closeness, but emotional vulnerability, sharing feelings, expressing our needs, and opening up in ways that had felt impossible just a few months ago. However, the biggest breakthrough came when we both realized that forgiveness wasn't a one-time thing, it had to be a continuous process. I had to forgive her repeatedly, not just for the affair, but for the pain she caused and for the trust I lost in myself. She had to forgive herself as well, which was a huge hurdle for her to overcome. But once we both understood that forgiveness was not a destination but a journey, we began to truly heal. That's where we are now. Still working through things. Still taking things one day at a time. But there's hope. I'm still not sure if our marriage will ever be what it was before the affair, but it doesn't have to be. We're building something new, stronger, more honest, and more resilient. The road ahead is still uncertain, but I'm starting to believe that it's worth the fight. We've started rebuilding our lives together, one step at a time, but every small victory is hard won. I still have moments where I feel insecure, questioning the future, but I remind myself that the pain is temporary, and the rebuilding is worth it. It's not easy, and there will always be scars, but I'm learning to embrace them as part of our story. Looking ahead, I know we have a long road before us. But I'm willing to walk it, if only to see where we end up. Reconciliation has opened up new challenges, but it's also given us a chance to be better, both as individuals and as partners. And despite all the doubts, the setbacks, and the pain, I'm beginning to think that maybe, just maybe, it's worth the journey. And that's a wrap for today's video, folks. Stay tuned for more exciting content. Thanks for watching.